Hey everybody, it's Pretty Elite with another episode of Total Breakdown. Today's battle is an interesting one with a very unique build on one end and behavior we don't often get to see on the other. Augustus leads the dwarfs to battle against Petterarkeost's empire, and I apologize for butchering these pronunciations. The dwarfs come in with a rune lord in charge, bringing with him Forge Fire, Rune of Hearth and Home, Stand Your Ground, Master Rune of Oath and Steel, Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and the Master Rune of Negation. The accompanying runesmith brings Forge Fire as well, and also has the Rune of Oath and Steel, the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and the Rune of Negation. Beyond that, we've got 4 units of Longbeards with great weapons, one ranked up to rank 3, the rest ranked up to rank 2, and a unit of Hammerers to form an armor-piercing infantry line with some heavy-hitting capabilities. The Slayers and the Dragonback Slayers will help counter any Empire cavalry, while the 2 units of Quarrelers will provide some ranged support. We also see 2 units of artillery, a bolt thrower, and the Goblobbers. The Empire is led by a general in the air carrying a potion of toughness and bringing deadly onslaught and stand your ground alongside Bloodroar. He leads an army of 4 units of greatswords, 6 units of handgunners, and 4 units of great cannons. Everything here is armor piercing, which makes sense against the dwarfs, and the cannons will ensure that the dwarfs cannot simply stand back and wait for the enemy to approach them. The choice not to bring cavalry makes dwarven investment in slayers less worthwhile, though it does remove one of the biggest advantages other races have over the dwarfs. Nonetheless, this is a very unique build. Let's see how it behaves on the battlefield. Alright, first things first, we are going to discuss deployment, of course, and it's a little haphazard from the Empire to begin with, but it does get organized later on. However, we are starting with the dwarfs. We've got the Longbeards with great weapons, and the Hammerers forming the front line. The Hammerers in the center here, providing a strong center, and on either flank we have units that can actually catch a charge. These guys do have charge defense against large units, so if Empire Cavalry decided to get adventurous and come in from the flanks, or even head-on, these guys, as long as they're braced, would actually be able to catch it. Right behind that front line, we do have the bolt throwers and the goblobbers over here, maybe just a little bit out of range as they are pushing forward, so maybe they should have been deployed a little bit further ahead, but then we've got the Rune Lord and the Runesmith here as well. And these guys, I typically suggest to deploy them at least a little bit further apart, just so that their influence spreads further down the line and actually covers more of the Dwarven army. The Quarrelers back here, able to get some shots off to provide some support, and then these Slayers and the Dragonback Slayers all the way at the back, again, to shut down any incoming incoming flanking maneuvers from the rears, from the sides, and also if the Longbeards, for example, were to get in the way of an incoming charge, the Slayers or the Dragonback Slayers would be able to dive in, so the Longbeards with their great weapons would actually be able to catch a charge, and the Slayers would then dive in afterwards and actually cause some extra damage. Now, the Dragonback Slayers, they do have charge defense against large as well, but the regular Slayers do not, so that definitely helps the Slayers out in terms of their overall survivability. Now, meanwhile, the Empire, as I said, has as those cannons there open fire, trying to hit the bolt thrower to begin with. As that's taking place, let's look at the Empire layout very quickly, because again, it's haphazard right now, but it ends up forming up later on. So we've got these 3 units of handgunners off to the side here, a pair over here in the center, another unit of handgunners to the side here. Great cannons sort of spread apart over the front here, making sure they can't get quickly shut down. I would have suggested actually deploying them all as far ahead as possible to get that early artillery damage started right away. Meanwhile, we've got 2 great swords here tucked away in the woods, a unit of great swords here tucked away in the woods, and then one last unit of great swords all the way over here. So again, very thinly spread, very widely spread, I should say, and the general of the Empire as well up in the air, sort of poking forward nice and early. So getting these cannons into place and get some shots off, and again, this formation, this layout kind of gains form over time. Now, as I mentioned, those initial shots from the great cannons there, doing some damage to the bolt throwers. Not a bad call, trying to shut down that artillery support nice and early, forcing the dwarfs to actually have to push forward. And you'll see the Goblobber, meanwhile, is responding in kind. These guys over here, as they open shots off, they're going to eat a fair bit of damage from the Goblobbers there. You'll see pretty good hits there, getting a lot of work done, not only physically, but also to morale. And you'll see, as a result of all of these great cannons forming up and opening shots off, not only to the not only onto the bolt thrower, but also onto the goblobbers here. As a result of that, the dwarves are forced to push forward, so they are now charging down the field. And again, that's not something we get to see very often. Dwarves typically will box up and fall back and wait for the enemy to charge, so that's definitely a nice sight. And you'll see some of those shots from this unit of great cannons do get blocked by the trees over here, so that's a little unfortunate. Could have maybe targeted a unit off to the side here, but it is what it is. You'll see as that cannon shot goes in and damages the goblobbers back here. Meanwhile, you'll see the goblobbers themselves doing a lot of work to this unit of great cannons here. Both of these shots do hit while the great cannon responds in kind, so good trade going on back there, some back and forth, and you'll see the general of the empire as well poking forward here. I think the thought was that the general of the empire could maybe circumvent the infantry, go around all this cannon, or sorry, all this bolt thrower and goblobber fire and the returning cannon fire, and maybe get into some of the artillery with the from the side. However, the dwarves, having seen that, are very quickly responding. These slayers are getting pulled back as opposed to pushing forward with the rest of the army. As you'll see right now, they're pushing forward, but having noticed that, they decide to pull back and try and keep these artillery pieces safe. Meanwhile, the dragonback slayers are still pushing forward, and that's a good idea. In this map, you don't really know if the Empire is hiding something else in the woods. There could be some Reichsguard, for example, so it's a good idea to keep at least one unit of Slayers up front, and since the Dragonback Slayers do have that charge defense against large, it's a good idea to have them pushing forward with the rest of the army. So again, the general just trying to come around, these Slayers being pulled back to try and protect the artillery here. So good management there, and you'll see as the other great cannons sort of form up, get into place, they're opening shots off, spreading where they send the love, so to speak. A little bit of damage coming into these Dragonback Slayers, as well as the Longbeards here, as the Goblobber continues to open shots off at the great cannon here, trying to get them to rout off. You'll see a lot of damage happening onto these Longbeards with great weapons and the Slayers there. Because they were clumped up, they provided a pretty sweet target, and you'll see that trail of dead dwarfs as these guys are taking a fair amount of hurt. It doesn't look like too much, but that's spread around across 2 units, so it is helping quite a bit, especially in the long run. Meanwhile, you'll see this unit back here of great cannons, they have routed off, so really the Goblobber could have switched its target, and at the same time you'll see these Slayers as well targeted by some of that cannon fire. These Slayers continue to take some damage as well, and there you'll see these cannons trying to hurt these Slayers, so not a bad idea. These guys are unbreakable, so they will fight to the death, so it's a good idea to try and kill them before lines meet. And again, these Slayers back here just preventing the general from being as aggressive as he might like to be, so again, not a bad idea to target these Slayers. Now you'll see the Goblobbers there continue to open shots off at the Great Cannon even when they're routing, so a couple of wasted shots there, and you'll see this Great Cannon unit here again trying to get some shots into the, it looks like the Bolt Thrower over here, maybe the Quarrelers. However, because of the hill, it's a little bit harder for some of these shots to land. Now the Goblobbers, meanwhile, are responding by hitting these handgunners, and that's not a bad idea at all. Again, trying to shut down that ranged support before it's able to get any work done. And meanwhile, back here, you'll see the General of the Empire unable to engage the Goblobbers, unfortunately, because the Slayers are right there. Even though they're taking a little bit of damage, again, they're not just going to rout, so they are right there. And meanwhile, these Quarrelers are turning around to open shots off at the General of the Empire as he ventures towards the Bolt Thrower. The Slayers over here really could have been kept in the center in a more centralized position, and that way the General might be a little bit more worried about engaging either of these artillery pieces. This definitely commits them to protecting the Goblobber before protecting anything else. So as you'll see, as these Quarrelers open shots off into the General of the Empire, as he just manages to dodge that Goblin on a rock, you'll see these Dragonback Slayers as well pushing back here, because it's very clear the General is going to try and engage the Bolt Thrower, so these Dragonback Slayers here trying to fall back there and provide some support. Meanwhile, you'll see these handgunners opening shots off, I think focusing on the Runesmith right now. Unfortunately, the tree's blocking a lot of those shots, and meanwhile the Goblobber continues to try and cause some damage to these handgunners over here. Again, both physical and morale. Scare these guys off, try and prevent that initial ranged damage that's coming in, and you'll see a lot of damage being done here. These guys are taking a lot of hurt. Unfortunately, the Runesmith maybe not the best target. Now, at this point, the Empire's formation really starts to take shape. We've got this unit of handgunners over here. This pair still in the center here, but this one's about to rout. These guys are wavering under that Goblobber fire. And over here, we've got these 2 units of handgunners off to the side forming up, and then this unit of handgunners over here as well. So you'll see sort of a cup of range support able to fire into the enemy as they close the gap. So sort of a pseudo kill box, if you will, half of a kill box. And as these guys charge down, they will take a lot of damage from that ranged fire. Meanwhile, back here, you'll see as the General was taking care of the Bolt Throwers, if we can just see their health, Thank you, tree. The general does dive down to try and take care of the bolt throwers. The corridors are opening fire, and you'll see they are taking some damage from those cannons. But again, trying to shut them down. The Dragonback Slayers here not committing into the general of the Empire, staying back here to try and protect the corridors instead. And the general unfortunately pops stand your ground, so not the best call. His leadership was not taking that much damage from the ranged fire, so maybe a little premature there. Meanwhile, back here, you'll see those Slayers and the Goblobber continue to take damage from that ranged fire. Meanwhile, over here, as these guys all push forward, you'll see these handgunners do start opening fire at their respective targets. So these guys are relatively safe because they're going through these trees. They're not going to eat too much damage. But let's resume to full speed and see exactly how this breaks down as that last Goblin kind of comes in and hits these handgunners once again, causing a lot of damage. These handgunners over here opening shots off at these Longbeards, doing a fair amount of damage. Meanwhile, these handgunners over here firing at these Longbeards alongside these handgunners, doing a decent amount of damage here. These guys, meanwhile, firing at these Longbeards instead, while these handgunners themselves are firing over here. Look at how much damage these Longbeards are taking. They are taking a lot of damage, already halfway down their health bar without nearly closing the gap. At least 2 more volleys, I think, in there before these guys are able to engage. But however, these greatswords back here should have been pushed forward. No use hiding them right now. They really should have been pushed forward. These handgunners right now should have been pulled back, and these greatswords should have been pushed forward over here, and these greatswords, should have been pushed forward over here as well to shut down all this aggression, because eventually these gaps are going to close, and the handgunners don't stand a chance against Longbeards with great weapons. You will see, however, as these Longbeards are closing that gap, the collective fire from this unit of handgunners and this unit of handgunners is doing a lot of work. Again, these guys are already at 50% of their health, at least 1 more volley in there. These handgunners, meanwhile, are firing at this unit of Longbeards, doing a lot of damage there as well. So some beautiful crossfire going on, both visually and tactically speaking. But in the center here, a bit of a mistake here. So these handgunners do get hit by the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, that's not the mistake. That's a good call there. You want to shut down that ranged support. But the mistake was not pulling back sooner. Again, these greatswords should have been pushed forward, and those handgunners should have been pulled back a lot earlier. Meanwhile, you'll see back here, the General of the Empire had to disengage with the bolt thrower, taking a fair amount of damage from the corridors, so had to actually disengage and couldn't actually dive into the corridors either because they were protected by the Dragonback Slayers. So good use of Slayers there, forcing the General of the Empire to pull back, but the General of the Empire could have dove into the side of this unit of Longbeards and shut them down right now. They would have been terrified away. I'm assuming, given their leadership, another volley from the handgunners and a charge from the General of the Empire probably would have terrified them right off, and the greatswords could have been sent in to deal with this unit of Longbeards instead. Meanwhile, you'll see here, not only do we have the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, now we also have the regular Rune of Wrath and Ruin, ruining the day of these handgunners as they try and finally retreat. Meanwhile, over here, you'll see these Longbeards continue to close that gap. They're targeting this unit of handgunners as they continue to fire on this unit of Longbeards. Again, almost at 50% of their health already. Now they do retarget. They're opening fire on these Longbeards instead because they are the more threatening unit, and look at that. Look at the amount of damage that's going through right now with all that ranged fire. It's surprising that they're even able to close the gap. Under that much range fire, you'll see they are shaken. Very quickly, they will be wavering. And you'll see as well the Rocklobber continues to try and cause some, the Goblobber continues to try and cause some damage across the Empire lines. Over here, though, the Longbeards are able to close the gap here. The handgunners just start retreating a little bit too late, and now they'll be running away for a fairly long time. If they'd been pulled back sooner and the greatswords had been sent in to close that gap, these handgunners would have been able to resume firing a lot sooner. Now, over here, you'll see, again, these Longbeards are now wavering, and if we'll quickly resume to full speed, making sure now's the time to do it. There's a lot going on, as you can see. So let's resume to full speed, and you'll see over here, as the gap closes with these handgunners, they will take a little bit of melee damage, but that supporting fire from these handgunners into the backs of these Longbeards will scare them right off. They're in melee, but they're losing against some handgunners, and there you have it, the rout. These handgunners, meanwhile, were opening shots off on these Longbeards, and now these handgunners are all free to do the same on this other unit of Longbeards with great weapons. So getting some of that damage in on these guys now, and again, these greatswords should have been sent in a little bit sooner to engage. A little late there, but at least it's happening now. They're being sent in to engage as these handgunners are falling back. Meanwhile, over here, maybe a bit premature on some of these runes. The Master Rune of Oath and Steel, the Master Rune of Negation, the Rune of Negation, and the Rune of Oath and Steel all went down when the engagement was with Great Cannons and the handgunners here. The Great Swords only engaged now, but these runes are largely used up already, as you can see at the bottom left side of the screen there. They're largely already used up, so should have waited just a little bit longer, allowed these Great Swords to dive in, and then pop some of those defensive runes, because that's when you really need it, because the Great Swords are armor piercing. So a little bit of impatience there perhaps, but ultimately not the end of the day. Meanwhile, back here, you'll see these Longbeards were able to close the gap with the handgunners, but these greatswords now able to push in and engage from the rear and shut down these Longbeards once and for all. Meanwhile, these Longbeards over here continue to push in, chasing these handgunners, scare them right off, and shut down this unit of great cannons as well. Meanwhile, the Quarrelers are continuing to push forward, getting ready to try and provide some support to the front there. These Longbeards, again, still routing, getting the hell out of there, while the General of the Empire decides to come in here and finish the job off with the bolt thrower. So diving in there, there's no protection anymore apart from these Slayers over here, but I feel like maybe the Dwarves are still a little concerned about the Goblobber because that is causing more damage, so allowing the bolt thrower to just perish there. Meanwhile, the handgunners over here now opening fire on these Quarrelers instead. Good call. You want to try and cause some damage. I think they're actually targeting these Quarrelers, and that would be a bad call. Should be targeting these guys instead because the trees are going to block a lot of the shots going through here. But nonetheless, a fair amount of damage being done there. 2 range support for the that the Dwarfs would have otherwise. We do have our first shatter here, I believe. The Great Cannon over here deciding this battle is certainly not worth it and deciding to get the hell out of there. And meanwhile, these Great Swords over here sort of interspersed with the Great Cannon. You need to be very careful about this because friendly fire is very real. As we've seen in past videos, a Great Cannon at point-blank range shooting the head of an Empire unit will blow their brains right off. The Longbeards, however, now being hit by the Great Swords and getting this fire coming in from the side as well from these handgunners. These guys are not going to make it. They're losing decisively already, so their morale is low, and the shots, of course, are going to cause a significant amount of damage to their health as well. Meanwhile, at the center here, you'll see these 2 units of great swords that are clumped in. They're trying to deal with the hammerers as quickly as possible, and again, now is when those runes of negation would have been extremely helpful because of that damage resistance buff it does give. Over here, the Longbeards, meanwhile, being able to shut down the handgunners and the Great Cannon with minimal contest. The great swords over here really should be chasing these Longbeards or chasing these guys down. I would suggest chasing this unit of Longbeards down because they are low on health already, might be able to cap them off and save these handgunners who have more individuals left as opposed to these handgunners who really, they're pretty much doomed at this point. Meanwhile, the General, you'll see, having mostly taken care of the bolt thrower, decides to disengage and push forward, and these handgunners, meanwhile, continue to open shots off at these Quarrelers over here, trying to get them to give up before they're able to do too much. The Goblobber continues to open shots off, getting a decent amount of hurt into these handgunners there, trying to, again, scare them off to prevent that support, but you'll see the Longbeards here now getting sandwiched with that gunfire, a little bit of support coming in from these handgunners as well. Not really willing to fight. They are wavering, very quickly being taken care of between the handgunners and the great swords. And over here you'll see the Rune Lord is being targeted by this unit of handgunners, and that's not the worst call, though. Maybe firing into these hammerers right now would be the better idea. And you'll see over here the General of the Empire does dive into the Quarrelers. However, while that's a good idea, popping Stand Your Ground was really unnecessary. That extra melee defense and leadership doesn't help too much against the Quarrelers. So instead of popping them now, saving them, maybe coming over here, popping Stand Your Ground to try and keep these great swords here fighting more securely, you know, making sure they're doing better, increasing their melee defense, and then turning around to hit the Quarrelers. That might have worked, or doing what he's doing right now, simply taking care of these Quarrelers is not a bad idea, but hold back on using those abilities until they are ideal. Meanwhile, these handgunners, now the gap is being closed by these Dragonback Slayers. The Dragonback Slayers are faster than handgunners, so not only should that be embarrassing for the handgunners, but it should also be quite scary as these Dragonback Slayers are closing the gap. Meanwhile, over here you'll see the Longbeards manage to rout off this unit of handgunners, or yep, this unit of handgunners, and now trying to do the same, I think, to the Great Cannon perhaps, or pushing towards the center, and these great swords still just left completely unengaged. And that's to the fault of the Empire. They should have been pushed in at this point, at least, to, you know, shut down these Longbeards once and for all, but just left in the woods there, forgotten, and poorly managed at the end of the day. Meanwhile, you'll see this unit of Longbeards that was engaged over here has ultimately surrendered. They're on their way out as well, and overall, the Empire is having a pretty good time. The Slayers back here now being shot at by the handgunners over here who have pushed forward from this hilltop, and they want to try and shut down some of these Slayers, maybe open fire at some of these Goblobbers who have basically been able to use all of their ammunition at this point. Over here, meanwhile, you'll see the hammerers have very quickly been taken care of. Even though the Runesmith is there trying to provide some support, he is also losing quite heartily, and the Quarrelers now trying to get the hell away from the General of the Empire. So let's go back to full speed here, and you'll see the General continues to try and destroy these Quarrelers over here. These great swords still chasing these Longbeards away, trying to get them to shatter, perhaps, or finish them once and for all. Meanwhile, over here, you'll see the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin and the Rune of Wrath and Ruin go down amidst these great swords, and that will do a significant amount of damage. You'll see they are now losing quite heftily, especially with the Rune Lord having dove in there, so so they are losing now and taking a lot of damage. So great use of the runes there, making sure that these guys aren't able to stick around for much longer. Meanwhile, these handgunners, you'll see they are trying to shut down the goblobbers there, and these handgunners as well now pushing forward, maybe trying to shut down these slayers. These slayers realizing this is a serious problem, so they're being pushed in to provide some support, and these quarrelers meanwhile opening shots off at these great swords. Not a bad idea, trying to kill them off before they're able to engage. They are a threatening unit to these dwarves, and meanwhile you'll see here a good use of the Master Rune of Oath and Steel. These guys are armor piercing though, so unfortunately they're just going to cut through that extra armor, but stand your ground as well, coming in for that extra melee defense and the leadership bonus, so making sure that these guys are able to stick around and fight. Meanwhile, these quarrelers continue to open shots off, now firing at the handgunners, also a good call, trying to shut down that ranged support. The Rune Lord meanwhile dives into the great cannons here because they are getting shots into these quarrelers, so trying to shut that down, so good call there. However, the Rune Lord is taking a lot of damage. I think he may have taken a cannon shot there. Meanwhile, these slayers here shutting down these handgunners, because again, these handgunners, they should be embarrassed. These slayers can close that gap. They're a lot faster, so they are just about to close that gap. Good movement there, good use there, and you'll see now that those greatswords finally got pulled in against these longbeards, finally got pushed into action. These longbeards are now routing, so good job there, making sure that, well, good job at the end of it all, making sure that these greatswords saw some action and did some good work scaring those longbeards off. Meanwhile, you'll see over here the runesmith providing some support with the Rune of Negation and the Rune of Oath and Steel. So the Rune of Negation, again, very powerful here because these greatswords are armor piercing, so that extra damage resistance is going to help significantly. The Rune Lord making a bit of a mistake here, disengaging with the Great Cannon, allowing it to resume fire. Meanwhile, these Dragonback Slayers here, they sort of crept around, and now they're coming in for those handgunners again, so these Slayers sort of shutting down the range support. Great use of Slayers there. Even though there wasn't any enemy cavalry outside the General of the Empire, these Slayers are seeing some serious action, so I'm sure they're happy about it. Meanwhile, the Bolt Thrower you'll see back here, by virtue of not having been completely taken care of, they have come back onto their equipment, and now they're responding and opening fire once again. So good use there, good eye there, keeping your mind on that unit of bolt throwers that had run off. At the same time, though, these goblobbers have completely used up all of their ammunition, so that really goes to show they weren't able to, the Empire wasn't able to shut down the goblobber. They've used up all of their ammunition, and now they can dive into melee if they want to get some kills on their, on their record. Meanwhile, you'll see here the Dragonback Slayers very quickly shutting down that support, and these handgunners have given up. They're already on their way out, and you'll see the Rune Lord here now returning to that same unit of Great Cannons. So very unfortunate there, a little bit of time wasted ultimately, and you'll see now these Longbeards and the Runesmith there chasing after this Great Cannon. These Slayers as well coming in to shut that Great Cannon down once and for all. Meanwhile, these Great Swords over here chase those Quarrelers away to shut them down, and at this point they really need to be pushed in here to shut down these Longbeards and the Runesmith. Sending units in one at a time is going to spell doom for each and every one of them. These Hammerers as well, you'll see now willing to come back into the fight after being taken care of nice and early, and over here, again, these Great Cannons that have been left unattended are now returned to, and they've been equipped again, they've been armed again, and they're opening shots off. So great sort of awareness by both generals there. A lot of people will forget to rearm their artillery equipment, and that's a waste of money. When you have the opportunity to return to your equipment and open shots off again, you should make sure you do that. And over here you'll see these Longbeards are trying to close the gap onto these handgunners. These handgunners don't want any of that though, so they are opening shots off, trying to scare these Longbeards off with some of that gunfire, and the Great Cannon as well, I believe, aiming at the very same Longbeards over here, wanting to try and protect these handgunners, and that is a good call. Of course, you want these guys safe, so you'll see some of that ranged fire coming in, and I think the being under artillery fire will be enough to scare those guys off. Meanwhile, over here you'll see we've got the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin and the Rune of Wrath and Ruin once again going down on the great swords here, alongside damage coming in from the Runesmith and the Rune Lord under the influence of the Rune of Oath and Steel. You'll see here as well these Longbeards closing that gap as well, trying to shut down these great swords once and for all. And again, with those two runes causing direct damage, they're eating a lot of damage. So good rune management there. Meanwhile, this unit of Great Cannons has been basically taken care of once they've been engaged by the Dragonback Slayers here. These handgunners standing, opening shots off at these Slayers, I believe. And meanwhile, you'll see the dwarfs that were equipping the Goblobbers are now diving into combat as well. They want a piece of the action after all. Back here you'll see this unit of Longbeards has been taking fire from the Great Cannon, so they aren't able to stick around. They do start to rout as the handgunners were pulling back as well. And meanwhile, you'll see here the General of the Empire pulling back in and trying to get involved again after having scared the bolt throwers off their equipment once more. So again, good management of the General of the Empire there, deciding to pop once again Deadly Onslaught here, despite not actually charging into anything. So a bit of a bad call there, a bit of a a wasted use of their ability there. And meanwhile, over here, you'll see we've got Stand Your Ground going down as well, again increasing melee defense and providing a lot of support to these guys, making sure they're able to take care of these great swords very quickly. So again, these great swords now as well coming in as individuals, not a good idea. Basically sending men into the slaughterhouse one at a time. So overall, it would have been a much better idea to pull back, reform, if anything, and then push in together, because at that point, with the general there as well, the great sword stood a chance. But like this, being taken out by the Rune of Wrath and Ruin and the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin while surrounded by dwarves on all sides, simply not working out. And meanwhile, you'll see here the general of the Empire trying to get in there and provide some support. And that's a good call, some morale support and some overall support through some damage. Dives in. Unfortunately, the Slayers are right here, so they will cause some damage. The Great Cannon, meanwhile, opening shots off at the Hammerers, and before they can even dive into combat, they do get routed right off. Meanwhile, over here, you'll see the Goblobbers are actually chasing down these handgunners, and that's a great idea, because the Goblobbers really don't have any other use, so might as well force the handgunners to retreat. Now, I don't know if the handgunners were in skirmish mode, or if they're being pulled back now, but one way or another, they have been shut down. They're completely useless right now, and you'll see these great swords have been fully taken care of, despite Stand Your Ground going down to provide them some support. Far too little, far too late. These guys have been taken care of. And meanwhile, over here, you'll see these handgunners firing at this unit of Routing Longbeards. So a couple of wasted shots there. They should have been pulled in, maybe to fire at these Quarrelers, or to maybe provide some support at the central engagement, which is where, well, the fate of this entire engagement sort of rests at this point. The General of the Empire here, meanwhile, chasing after these Hammerers, trying to finish them off once and for all. Potion of Toughness does go down to recover some of that damage taken from the Slayers, but now over here the Great Swords make another big mistake. First of all, they dive in as individuals. They dive into these Dragonback Slayers there. They get hit by the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, so they're taking damage, and all of these rear charges are now coming in as well, and they have the Master Rune of Negation, so these guys are not going to be taking too much damage from these great swords that decided to dive in there. So again, very quickly eating a lot of hurt. You'll see very quickly falling apart. And the General of the Empire, though, good job here shutting down those Hammerers, but those great swords needed you, man, and you just left them to die. The handgunners here still running away from the Goblobbers. Meanwhile, the handgunners finally deciding to open shots off, I think, at these Quarrelers now. The General of the Empire as well decided to dive in and shut them down once and for all, and you'll see between the General's mere presence and a couple of gunshots, these guys do shatter. So the General there doesn't need to engage anymore, decides to dive in anyways, toss a couple of dwarfs around, have a good time, why not? And then ultimately can go up and try and shut down the Bolt Thrower as well, or pull back, shut down the Hammerers, or pull back here and maybe try and rescue these handgunners from that potential threat. A lot of these guys are routing at this point, so the dwarf player doesn't think he needs to shut them down. That's perfectly fine, though. It's a good idea to at least send one unit back here, because the trees will otherwise provide some cover, and these handgunners as well continue to get chased down. Meanwhile, the General of the Empire decides to shut down these Hammerers once and for all. Good call, because if those Hammerers return, they will cause a little bit of damage before they die, and there you have it. They've been frightened right off as well, so they have been shattered completely, and the General does not need to get engaged anymore. Meanwhile, you'll see these great swords have recovered from their rout, and they are hidden now, so the dwarfs don't actually know that there's anything left on the field apart from the General of the Empire and the handgunners, which is why it's essential to keep an eye out for something like that. At this point also, the General of the Empire does want to dive in here and take care of these Goblobbers, etc. that are chasing down these handgunners. Does so with relative ease here. The handgunners can now resume fighting. Unfortunately, a big mistake here. These great swords are being sent over here. Now, a couple of things. At this point, the Empire really needs to form up again. We've got this unit of handgunners. They've got a little bit of support left in them. We've got these two units of great swords who are basically already taken care of. So these guys really should sort of pull over here, perhaps, get to the hill. The General of the Empire needs to be here as well, and the handgunners need to be pulled back here as well. But first, the General of the Empire should take care of that Bolt Thrower, because you'll see, once again, the Bolt Thrower has been manned, dwarfed, and is opening shots off once again. So that Bolt Thrower needs to be taken care of. Unfortunately, these great swords here, they're pushing out right now. So while they're hidden and safe while hidden, unfortunately, by pushing out right now, the dwarfs are going to realize that, well, I mean, this is a quick and easy target to take care of with a General, occupied elsewhere. So you'll see the Goblobbers here being very quickly taken care of. Unfortunately, the General of the Empire pops Stand Your Ground. Again, a little wasteful there. No need for that extra melee defense or the extra leadership right now. That needs to be saved for later, and you'll see now that these great swords have sort of poked out of the forest here, and they're very clearly visible. The dwarfs now know that there are a couple of other units left on the field as well. So the General here, you'll see, going up there against the Bolt Thrower, but right away all of these dwarfs do respond, and they're pouring down towards the great swords, and that's exactly what I was talking about. Revealing these troops are still alive before long, or before the right time has sort of split the general up, he's unable to take care of both things at the same time, obviously. So he goes up there, very quickly frightens off those bolt throwers, is able to turn around, and very quickly has to come back here and provide some support. Maybe shut down the goblobbers, maybe drop stand your ground. This is where stand your ground would be extremely helpful. So the Empire does form up. Good thinking there, you know, good thought, good presence of mind to do that. But at this point, it is frightening. You'll see these goblobbers as well diving in to shut down the handgunners, you know, prevent that ranged fire support. These guys are firing into the Dragonback Slayers. I don't think that's the best call right now. Typically, I do say fire into Slayers when they're, you know, far away, get that damage in because they're unbreakable. They'll die to the, they'll fight to the death. But right now, it was maybe possible to scare off these goblobbers, maybe, you know, get some damage into leadership or get rid of the runesmith so, you know, some of these runes can't go off. So there were maybe some better targets for the handgunners there, and you'll see the general here in a bit of a tough spot, needs to provide that leadership support, needs to provide some damage support as well into the enemy. So flying over, providing that support by his, you know, mere presence. These greatswords have already routed off, just seeing the dwarves charge them. And unfortunately, the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin does go down on these greatswords as well, dropping them very quickly. And as the dwarves dive in, those greatswords are going to give up as well. And unfortunately, you know, a couple of shots come in from the handgunners. However, the goblobbers do dive in to shut them down. The Rune of Wrath and Ruin goes down on them as well to kill them. Nice and easy. And meanwhile, over here, the General of the Empire dives into the Dragonback Slayers and the Slayers, throwing them around, doing a decent amount of damage, I suppose, but they are anti-large. Stand your ground does go down to increase melee defense, but that's not going to be enough when everybody swarms in and surrounds the General of the Empire. Unfortunately, they all do dive in, and you'll see the General is beginning to waver, starts to shatter, and that is that. A Pyrrhic victory for the dwarfs. An extremely unique composition brought to the field by the Empire, but unfortunately the surprise factor was just not enough to topple the dwarfs, you know, the low center of gravity and all. The dwarfs were quick as they can be to close the gap, and some troop mismanagement, I think, is what ultimately cost the day for the Empire. The unit of greatswords on the left flank, as seen from the dwarf perspective, stood unoccupied for far too long, and sending greatswords in one unit at a time to that meat grinder was a terrible idea. Also, not taking any magic to the field was a bit of a mistake. With a build that relies so much on ranged fire, the net of a Mintok can come in handy to pin down some potential targets. In the case of this battle, that could have actually saved the handgunners to the center and the left, again as seen from the dwarf perspective, and that may ultimately have resulted in an Empire victory. As always, guys, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Total War content and keep sending in those battle replays. I've said it countless times, I think it's one of the best ways to learn, and it's great to see some interesting plays from various generals and how they command their troops. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the battlefield.